For today, we are actually going to talk about everything relating to a Pokemon's energy. As it turns out, there's more than one reason why phone tracking is better than the PokeGo Plus tracking, and it's to do with energy restoration. Welcome back to another Pokemon Sleep video. It's Bro Vinny here. And while I've covered this in the past, I now know and understand it a lot more than I did months ago. And for today's video, we're going to talk about four main things. One is how much faster your Pokemon can farm if it's at a higher energy. Two, why is the phone tracking better than the PokeGo Plus tracking and how to fix that. Number three, how to use the energy curve analysis on the Rainen X calculator to help you visualize how your energy will fare throughout the day. And number four, briefly talk about whether taking naps is better for energy or not. Now, just to get some basic knowledge out of the way first, energy goes down 1% every 10 minutes of waking hours. So every 10 minutes, this energy minuses 1%. So that means it will take 1000 minutes in order for your Pokemon to reach from 100 energy down to 0 if there's no healing at all. And that is approximately 16.6 hours. But a Pokemon actually reaches its lowest frequency a little bit earlier than that, at about 13 hours. And that's because the efficiency, in other words, how much quicker a Pokemon can farm productions like berries and ingredients if it were at a higher energy level, actually reaches the lowest point at 20% energy. Because the way this works is a step ladder. So the way that the game works is that from 81% onwards to 150%, which is the maximum energy restoration, you can't achieve that with sleep. You can achieve it if you have a healer to keep increasing the energy level of your Pokemon or using a energy pillow. But anywhere above 81%, including 81%, you get the same smiley face, which means it's at a 2.2 times multiplier on the frequency. So the way you can estimate that is basically divide this number by 2 as long as your Pokemon remains above 81% on the energy. Now, a lot of people have asked me in previous videos whether above 100% it's actually even faster, but now we know that it's not. At above 100%, it's still at 2.2 times the efficiency. And then in a step ladder fashion, and you can tell at which step ladder your efficiency is at by the emoji, your Pokemon, as it loses the energy, reduces the efficiency. So instead of being 2.2 times faster at the highest energy level, it starts to fall to 1.9 times, 1.6 times, 1.4 times, and then a pretty big drop, a bigger drop than any other drop before that at 20% energy level. So at the lowest efficiency, in other words, below 20% energy, this number here tells me exactly when I would expect the next production unit to come. So in other words, either a berry drop or an ingredient drop. So I would come back in an hour and I would expect Bondsleep to have produced either a tomato or a berry. If you remember what I was saying before, you would actually reach the lowest efficiency earlier than when you reach 0% energy because the lowest efficiency is at 20%. So for you to go from 100 down to 20, that's 80%, and it's 10 minutes per energy down. If you divide that by 60, that's 13.3 hours for your Pokemon to be farming at its worst rate. So if for some reason you can't maintain a good energy level, for example, if you have an energy recovery down nature, then your Pokemon will not be farming as quickly as a Pokemon that has energy recovery up. However, you can compensate for that by having a healer on the team. So when we talk about healers, we're talking about things like Wigglytuff, who have energy for everyone, and when the skill triggers, provide your entire team with a certain amount of energy. So in my case, my Wigglytuff gives 15% energy, and on average, it triggers about 2 to 4 times a day. And this energy restoration is affected by the energy recovery nature as well. So as long as the other 4 members of my team are relatively strong, running a healer will keep them strong and speedy throughout the day. Now, one thing I'd like to point out here is that I commonly see people say, look, my healer triggers 5 times a day or 3 times a day or only 1 time a day. That information in itself isn't actually that useful, because a healer that triggers in the morning versus a healer that triggers at night just before you sleep do totally different things. In fact, if this Wigglytuff triggered the energy restoration just before I start tracking sleep, it does absolutely nothing. And we can demonstrate that on the Rainonix calculator in a moment. There's a second important thing you should understand, because I don't think this part is actually common knowledge. It's not talked about enough. How sleep recovery actually works. And this will be important to know why the plus tracking is actually worse. So as it turns out, energy recovery gets added. So this 73% recovery gets added to the Pokemon's energy before you start tracking sleep. So hypothetically, if I went to sleep with this Blastoise right now and I restored 20% energy, it actually doesn't matter how long I sleep, the energy that gets added is plus 20% from this score, meaning that the energy on the Pokemon doesn't fall when you start sleeping, even though they are continually producing berries and ingredients in the background. So in other words, if you're a player who always sleeps just the 1 session for, let's say, 8.5 hours and always get 100% sleep score, you're almost always wasting some of that energy that you've restored, unless you started tracking this sleep at 0%. Then 100% sleep score makes sense. If your Pokemon's energy before you start tracking sleep is, say, 60%, you only need a 40%, or in this case 38% sleep score in order to fully recover this Blastoise. And so from an energy perspective and an efficiency perspective, taking naps and splitting your sleep score may help you optimize the energy recovery on your entire team. In the last few examples, I haven't included any nature or sub-skill effects, but if your Pokemon has energy recovery down, then you take the sleep score and you multiply that by 0.8 because it's a 20% reduction. If it has energy recovery up, you multiply the sleep score by 1.2. Unfortunately, it cannot go over the cap of 100% energy if it's from sleeping. So going over 100% must be done with other means like a skill trigger or energy pillow. And if you have a Pokemon with energy recovery bonus unlocked, then you also can multiply the result, the sleep score, by 1.12. Then add that to your Pokemon's energy at the start of tracking. So what's wrong with the plus? Typically in the morning, when you wake up past 4 AM and you are done with your sleep session and you want to synchronize the game with the plus, it will ask you, do you want to synchronize? And you almost always want to press yes, synchronize at this point. Otherwise, the game would first consider you having not slept at all. So if you press synchronize at this point, there's no problem. It will take the energy at the start of tracking and then add your sleep score. Now, there's a problem. There are 2 situations where you can make the game think you didn't go to sleep but still restore the energy. One is if you press cancel, log into the game, find all your Pokemon at 0% energy, and basically not have produced much overnight, and the game considers the worst possible production amounts for your overnight sleep. Or in the second situation is if you're taking a nap in the middle of the day, in fact, the game will not ask you whether you want to synchronize every time you log into the game. It only asks you the first thing you do after 4 AM. So if you press this button in order to synchronize the nap session that you had, the problem is even though I was, say, tracking 2 hours of sleep on my plus, it would actually take the energy of my current team when I press the sync button. So for example, in this case, my current Blastoise is at 60%, not the energy at the start of the tracking. Because unlike phone users, they can't play the game while you're technically sleeping. Whereas For PokeGo Plus Plus players, you would have noticed by now, you can log into the game and do whatever you want, which is not a good thing because you want to keep your Pokemon at a high energy for productions. So the point here is when I actually press synchronize for my nap, it uses the energy of my current team, not the energy at the start of tracking to add the sleep score energy recovery. Hopefully I haven't confused anyone yet, because it gets a little bit more complex than that. But let me tell you a fix. If you really want to use the PokeGo Plus Plus to track, what you can do is you can clear cache on the game. But you must do this at the start of tracking. If I do it at this point where I've already done my tracking and I log into the game would have already considered the energy dropped before then adding the energy back. So my suggestion is when you press start tracking on the Plus Plus, don't play the game anymore, but also head on over to the title screen of the game and clear cache. Now it's a bit annoying because every time you do this, it's an extra few steps, but also you have to download a little bit of extra data. Then what happens is the game considers that you haven't been playing during that time, and it will actually, like in the morning session, ask you to synchronize with this button here, becoming available when you restart the game and get ready to sync. In which case, after our extensive testing, we have confirmed that the energy that gets added is towards the energy that's at the start of the session, of the start of the track sleep. And I'm going to thank Kinzugi in our Discord for pointing out this problem to me a few weeks ago. And you can read all about our research and testing in this topic if you're interested in the details of it. Alternatively, you could just use your phone to track, so it's under this setting here, track sleep with smart device for your nap session, and in that way you won't have a problem of having to clear cache. So while it might feel like it's a bug or a glitch with the PokeGo Plus Plus having to deal with this problem, the issue is that phone tracking users are not able to play the game, so PokeGo Plus Plus users in a way shouldn't be allowed to play the game while it's tracking as well. In a way, it kind of balances out between PokeGo Plus Plus users and phone users. The only catch is that for a PokeGo Plus Plus user, even if you didn't open the app and play the game during tracking sleep, unless you clear cache, you would still be dealt the worst hand by having the energy added to a reduced amount as opposed to at the start of tracking. Now at this point you might be questioning, well, what if I sleep a lot? The game gives you benefits and rewards up to 8.5 hours, but there's actually additional reward that it doesn't tell you about for sleeping longer. I'm not saying to do this, but while you're sleeping, your Pokemon's energy level doesn't drop. So even beyond 8.5 hours of sleep, you can actually maintain a relatively high energy level as long as you sleep more hours. Of course, you'll lose out on some things like being able to collect your ingredients or affecting your sleep consistency. But if you've ever wondered why, some days when you wake up a bit later, by the end of the day your energy is higher than usual, it's simply because your Pokemon's energy didn't drop while you were tracking sleep, even beyond the 8.5 hours. So that was the easy part of the video. Now on to some more complex stuff. This time, I'm going to explain to you how to use the energy curve analysis in order to see how your Pokemon's energy level will be maintained throughout the day if you sleep a certain way, or if you have a certain number of main skill triggers for energy for everyone, such as Wigglytuff or Sylveon. I'll leave a link to RainNX calculator in the description below so you guys can get access to this as well. So I'm going to show you guys how to use the energy analysis calculator in RainNX website. And first things first, I would set the energy for everyone recovery to 0, assuming that you don't have a Wigglytuff or a Sylveon on the team. Then I would input the time that you actually usually go to sleep. So let's say 12 AM to about 8:30. And you'll see that in the first chart, which is a very simple chart, is that your energy will go from 100% and then every 10 minutes would drop by 1 until towards the end of the day it's near 0%. Just before I sleep again. But of course, now we know that between 80 to 100%, the Pokemon has a flat 2.2 times efficiency, which is in this chart over here. So this one actually looks quite similar to the other chart that I showed you, but the other chart plots energy against efficiency as opposed to energy versus time and efficiency over time. But these two charts are related, and as you can see, up until my chart here reaches 80% energy, my efficiency remained at 2.2. And you'll see that as the energy goes down throughout the day in a stepwise fashion, the efficiency also goes down until eventually the 1 times multiplier is reached from the 20% mark onwards, which is directly related to this chart. Now, what if I say sleep a little bit less and actually add a nap in the middle of the day? And the way to add a nap is to click this button. Say I sleep between 1 o'clock and 3:30. So let's scroll down here. You'll see that my overall energy remains relatively higher than the first scenario. Now, unfortunately, I did confirm with Rain and X that this calculator doesn't account for the 8.5 hour limit. So you can get some really wacky charts if you actually overdo the sleep, like having like 220% energy, which is not possible. So just put in some realistic numbers if you want a relatively useful chart for yourself. And now you can see that by taking a nap, my overall energy remains relatively high throughout the day and also maintains a good efficiency throughout the day. And it is the area under the chart that will give you a comparable idea of whether your sleep efficiency is being maximized. So in this situation, I did take a nap relatively early. So I woke up at 7:25 and then I started a nap at 1:15. But if I was to take this nap much later on, let's say sometime between 8 o'clock to 10:30, have a look at what happens to my area under the chart, which represents some sort of production multiplier. It is much less than before, in the same way that if a Wigglytuff were to trigger their main skill earlier on in the day, maintaining this efficiency at a higher level before then it drops, which will give you a larger area under the chart compared to if a Wiggly, say, triggers right at the end of the day. So let's say drops down like this and then kind of goes up a tiny bit. The area under the chart is much less. This area represents the production amount without accounting for sub-skills or natures or the frequency. So it's just a value that you can use to compare between how you sleep and how your Pokemon may trigger their energy recovery. And really the only conclusion is the earlier your energy recovery, the better, as it provides a bigger area under this chart, which means more production, which also means that you're maintaining a high efficiency throughout more parts of the day. Let's take the example a little bit more extreme. Let's say somehow I managed to sleep a short session just before the main sleep session, and as you can see, my production is very, very abysmal compared to what I had earlier, where I slept earlier in the day, which shows a much bigger area under the chart. So once you've gotten used to playing with this first part, then you can start adding stuff here. Now, let's take a look at what happens if we have a healer on the team. So we're going to remove the second session. We're just going to have one session just so we can simplify the numbers. And let's say I sleep 8.5 hours. I wake up at 8:30 in the morning. So this here is the number of triggers that you expect a Pokemon with energy for everyone to have throughout the day. Let's say 1 for simplicity, and it's how much recovery that Pokemon has. So at level 5 main skill, my Wigglytuff has a 15% recovery. And then in regards to conservative versus optimistic, it's just a matter of, well, when do you expect that trigger to happen? If you want to see the chart when the trigger happens right at the start of your day, so let's say at 8:30 in the morning, my Wigglytuff goes, yep, let's trigger. then it's optimistic. And you can see that once triggered, the energy goes above 100%. And it only triggers one time, then I get this sort of chart. But if I was being conservative, then maybe it triggers in the middle of the day and you can see this chart instead. And again, if we compare the efficiency, the area under this chart, which again represents the amount of productions for your units, you can see that in this case, the one where the skill triggered sometime in the middle of the day is a little bit worse than if it triggered at the start. The area is a bit bigger. And then you can play around with the calculator a bit more and say you want to have it trigger 3 times throughout the day, and conservatively you can see that it will trigger at this point, it will trigger at this point. So conservatively 3 times spread throughout the day. The area under the chart is quite big to begin with because there were 3 triggers. But what if we were to look at a very optimistic outcome where somehow your Wiggly can trigger 3 times straight away, right, on the start of the day, which is impossible. But let's hypothetically say you got all 45 recovery, so all 3 times 45 energy recovery at the start of the day. This is the area under the chart. Once again, having energy recovery earlier is going to provide an overall better efficiency throughout the whole day. And you can see that that 2.2 times efficiency doesn't really drop at all until much later on. Then it drops a bit, but then you're ready to sleep again. Now, of course, this is almost an impossible scenario unless you run 3 Wigglytuff and they all trigger at the same time in the morning. But we could simulate this by saying, okay, let's not run a Wigglytuff, but use 5 energy pillows instead. You can start the day off with 140% energy, keeping your team at a high efficiency and better productions. And a final note is, Rainan wants me to let you guys know that there are a number of fixes coming in the future. It's not super urgent. Not a lot of people use this energy analysis, but things like the 8.5 hour limit that hasn't been implemented yet, and the 100% energy cap from sleep recovery. So please don't spam his DMs regarding questions on the calculator, but you are welcome to spam my comment section instead. So hopefully this video finally clarifies all the questions you guys have regarding energy in Pokemon Sleep, and also help you guys discover this tool in Rainanx Calculator and actually help you understand how these charts work. Because as always, it's actually more important to know how the calculator works than to just pluck a number from the calculator and say, oh, the calculator told me this. Thank you for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe.